that's been happening over several years. As people at Countryside have spoken to me, they've said that the idea came up 50 years ago, then 30 years ago, and every so often this idea would come up until the point where it must just have gotten enough momentum that they moved forward with it. So the pastor who saw it through was J.P. Duncan, and the merger happened in 2008. So the four churches, Newton, Ransom, Milwaukee, and Schultzville, decided to meet at the Newton United Methodist Church until their new building was ready to move into. So during that 4-year period, they purchased land and built a new building. There were 5 churches that were part of a cooperative parish. They called themselves Christians Uniting Together. And so there were 2 charges, both full-time charges. So one of the churches out of the 5 decided not to become part of the merger. But geographically, they're some of them are 3 or 4 miles apart from each other. So they recognize that this day and age, that you wouldn't plant churches that close together. Energy and enthusiasm. So the folks who agreed to be part of this, they embraced it. It wasn't something that was imposed on them. It was something they decided to do. The process was done very carefully, very intentional about every voice being heard. Minutes from every meeting were posted. They were put out where if you weren't able to come to the meeting, or if you didn't avail yourself to these meetings, you could still look at the minutes, see what's going on, talk about it with people. It developed a sense of trust among people, which gave them a very good feeling going forward. There are many, many positives. For one, if they had remained small, declining rural churches, it would have been less likely they would have attracted newcomers who would become contributing vital members. So by coming together, now merging as one congregation, acquiring land and building a building doesn't automatically ensure success. But they worked very hard to say, what are we aiming for here? They tried to be very true to the purpose of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. But what will that look like in our settings? So they looked at the programs that they had in their individual churches and said, well, let's not make any assumptions that that's what we're going to do here. So they really tried to develop ministries together. One of the challenges is when you're in small churches, very oftentimes ministries are individuals running the ministries. When you get into a church that's like a mid-sized church like Countryside is, obviously you have more accountability, you have teamwork, and it has to be that because otherwise, if you're trying to do an individual ministry, you're bound to get your feelings hurt at some point or another, and you're going to take things personally that are not intended to be personal. There's simply, a collective desire to serve our Lord more faithfully together. It is such a tendency we have to get excited when we can see land acquired, a foundation poured, the building's starting to go up, the mortgage starting to go down, and that's all very tangible and exciting and winsome for people. What's harder for us, I believe, is when we move from the concrete to the abstract, making disciples, measuring our spiritual growth, developing small group ministries. These become the challenges that somehow don't seem as recognizably measurable as building a building and reducing a mortgage. So that is really a major challenge for any congregations that are considering going into a merger. My guess is that by the time a declining congregation decides to finally become part of a merger, it's probably going to be a congregation that consists mostly of longer living people. So you're going to have a congregation that has a pretty high average age among its membership. Just coming together and acquiring a new building isn't where it's not the goal. The goal, that's a means to an end. And so from an institutional point, and I know this is not something that should be the what we aspire toward, but it's a reality. If we're reading a lot of names every All Saints Sunday, but we're not bringing in at least that many young people into our young people's ministry, new folks into membership, well then we're still a church in decline. We've simply shored it up, and we're a bigger church that continues to decline. So that remains a challenge for Countryside Church. And the truth is, when you try to come together, bring churches together, you're not going to have it all figured out from the outset. You're not going to know every detail of your next 20 years. So you're going to have to obviously save some of that. But I think the point of it is you have to always be looking ahead, always have a long-range plan, a short-range plan, always reassessing. Your long-range plan 10 years ago might not look anything like your long-range plan now or 10 years from now. So don't stop. I think even strong, well-established churches have to keep before them the purpose for why we exist as a church, which is making disciples of Jesus Christ. So in these churches, these 4 churches that were geographically close, if folks didn't know each other, they may have known of each other for the most part. But realistically, there were some people meeting each other for the first time. So when you have a visitor that shows up to one of these merger type of congregations, I know the case at Countryside is somebody might show up and say, well, I'm new here. Well, everybody else is bound to say, so are we, you know? And then the newcomer doesn't feel so much like they're the odd person out. They're fitting right in with everybody else who's new. There's no 50-year members yet because they're all new. Nobody's grandparented in to this particular situation. And again, if congregations decide to do this, do it right. You know, from the outset, decide we're going to have small groups. That's the foundation for, those are the cells, the building blocks for our historic Methodist movement. And it's no different today. We need each other. We need sociability. We need accountability. We need relationships. And when we move into these kind of structures, I think that's where people find they're getting to know each other really well. They're getting to be known by others, and it gives them a really strong sense of belonging.